Welcome to Our Certain Point of View, where your hosts Jim and Tim will bring you weekly discussions about the Star Wars universe. Our Certain Point of View is a fan-based podcast and has no connections with Disney, Lucasfilm, or any of their subsidiaries.
Hello, we are presenting a new podcast called Our Certain Point of View. My name is Jim.
My name is Tim.
And the purpose of this podcast is to, basically, we love Star Wars. We want to share our love of Star Wars. We want to do it in a way that's family-friendly, so you don't have to worry about listening to it in your car with little ones around. We also want to look at it through somewhat of a critical eye, so if we don't like what we're seeing, we're not going to be afraid to say it. But bottom line is, we love Star Wars and we want to talk about it. And with a lot of new releases coming up, it seemed like now was the time to start. So, first thing we want to talk about is how we as individuals, me and Tim, came across Star Wars in our own lives. We're a little bit different in ages, so probably a little bit different introduction. I am in my mid-40s, and I do remember when Star Wars A New Hope, or it was just called Star Wars back then, was released in theaters. My parents took me. I was very excited. I loved it. I thought it was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. Of course, I needed all the toys. My mom ordered a lightsaber for me in the mail, and the postman made the mistake of showing it to me when he walked up the driveway, and it was supposed to be a surprise gift. And I have loved Star Wars ever since. So my love for Star Wars goes back to 1977. I saw, of course, the sequels as they came out and endured that long wait for the prequels to come out, and like most people, had mixed feelings on them. But anyway, Tim, what about you?
So for me, I was pretty young. I'm in my mid-30s. I was not around for the 70s release. However, when I was about 10 or so, my dad came to me with a VHS tape and said, "Hey, I really think you'll like this." And so I put the VHS tape in, and it was Pinocchio. And as I got through Pinocchio, I realized that there was another movie on the tape, and that was Empire Strikes Back. So I started to watch that movie, and thankfully, because of timing, I didn't actually finish it. And this happened to come around the time, and I said 10. I may have been a little over 10 at that point, because this came at a time right before the movies were all re-released in theaters. And so I ended up going to see all these movies in theaters again. So it was nice to be able to do that shortly before those prequels came out. I was immediately hooked. Thankfully, all of my friend base at the time was hooked, and we just kept pushing from there. I was interested in the toys that were coming out at the time. I asked for a lot of them and got a lot of them. I was smart enough, even as a kid, to ask for doubles of every toy that I got so I could play and keep, but I was not smart enough to not take back those ones that were unopened, and many of them
That is smart, though.
were returned. So
this is how we got to know Star Wars, just a little introduction, and hopefully as this podcast goes on, we'll tell a little bit more about, just our feelings and what we've seen. The idea is that we want to do this weekly, and we've got different topics, but right now, one of the things that we want to feature with every podcast is a countdown of important dates. And probably the one I think a lot of us are looking forward to right now is the launch of Disney Plus, because that means the launch of The Mandalorian.
Oh, yes.
And how long is that, Tim?
62 days remaining until The Mandalorian.
Tim has a crew working on this countdown, and I know there's an app, too, in there. So 62 days remaining till the release of The Mandalorian. Very excited about that. The other, I think the other big, actually I don't know which one's next. The Return of Clone, no, it's going to be Rise of Skywalker next.
It will be Rise of Skywalker next.
So how long till episode 9?
Officially, release date, we are 100 days away.
But not
However,
for you and me.
No. We will see that movie on Thursday. We are 99 days away.
Heck yeah. That's awesome. So, yeah, 99 days for us. If you're not seeing that early viewing, then we'll try not to spoil it. So then I think the next big release date, at least one I'm extremely excited about, is I think Dave Filoni's coming back, isn't he, for Clone Wars
Dave
Season
Filoni
7?
will be back for Clone Wars Season 7 in February of next year is the projected release date right now.
That's exciting. The Clone Wars is, I think, one of the best things put out in the Star Wars franchise. But so I'm excited to see that. I hope they pick up with Ahsoka Tano's story where they left off and maybe join Rebels together. So I think this is really, I don't know how much more you want to go into. Some of the other things that we plan on talking about in the future. We've been looking at different topics, and wherever you find this podcast, feel free to leave a comment if you got topics you want to talk about. But some of the ideas that we were looking at is this debate, is there a correct way to introduce someone to Star Wars? In other words, if you got a little kid or someone who somehow has avoided Star Wars, what movie would you tell them to watch first? So is that what we want to talk about today?
We can go into some of that today. We've got some time here.
What do you think, Tim? That's weird that you started by watching part of Empire Strikes Back first, because that, I think, the majority of fans will feel is the worst of the Star Wars. No, we know that's the best of the Star Wars movies. But, man, it is dark.
Yeah, and just to clarify my position, I'm not arguing that it's not the best, but it's not my personal favorite of the Star Wars movies.
Controversial. So what order would you recommend for showing, and why?
Well, I personally would start, and it depends on for me it depends on the group that you're dealing with. If you're introducing someone who's especially younger and getting ready to watch Star Wars into the universe, you're going to start with your original trilogy, Episode 4, Episode 5. However, once you pass Episode 5, I recommend people go back to Episode 1. After Episode 1, finish the prequel trilogy, Episode 1, 2, 3, then come back into 6. For anybody who's seen, and I assume most people listening to this have seen the movies, you'll understand why 4 and 5 are important right away. But at Episode 3, we'll come back in to watch Episode 6 to finish the transition through 7, 8, and 9. Now this, for me, is just if you're watching that Skywalker saga. If you're trying to bring someone in who is not a young child, but certainly younger than any of us, you can start with the movies that are not part of the Skywalker saga. You can start with Solo and then Rogue One, and then I would proceed through the way that I thought. Now, those are my opinions. Jim, what have you got?
So you're saying hold off on Return of the Jedi?
I am.
See, I think I would disagree with that, only because I think I think you got to start with A New Hope, and mainly because, like you're saying, a lot of the surprises were designed in the way it was released. So finding out like Luke's parentage and whatnot, they released it in that order because they wanted people to experience it in that order. George Lucas did. But I also think you develop an emotional attachment for those characters as they are right there. And there is something of an ending at Return of the Jedi, and you don't really get that when you go back to The Force Awakens and all. You're picking up at a totally different chapter in their lives. So I think I would go New Hope, Empire, Return of the Jedi, and then I'd probably go back. Well, then I'd go back and start the prequels and get that storyline. But if you got the time, you got to throw the Clone Wars in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. I think you got to do it, and then you got to throw Rebels in after that.
You absolutely have to throw Rebels in.
Then you got to throw Rogue One in, and then we start to visit the new movies. What about Solo? Where are we putting that?
Well, it depends. For me, if it was, like I said, a teenager, I would actually probably start them with Solo. I think that it would draw a teenager in without going too much, and then allow you to introduce other things without really giving away, or, and I know some of you won't like this, ruining any specific characters.
What about Maul?
They'll have no idea. What was that at the end?
What was that at the end? I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
So,
or maybe they go back and then they're watching Phantom Menace and they see him get chopped up and say, "Wait a minute, I know this guy's going to be around later." I don't know. I guess bottom line is not necessarily a wrong way to watch Star Wars, in my opinion, because I love it. But that's how I would introduce it to a new viewer, which my kids have already seen it, so it's a moot point for me now.
I've got one more coming up to see it, so
nice.
It's going to work out okay. I would like to add in one point, if you play back at all and pay attention to the way that we did this, we are not big on spoilers. We will not look for people who claim to have gotten information and shared that information online, this is not the place you're going to find any of that.
Yep.
If it's possible that it's real information, I don't want to get it until we're in the movie, and I'm not going to give it to you till you're in the movie.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. So as like episodes of Mandalorian or the new Clone Wars or even Rise of Skywalker come out, if there's a Reddit thread or something, they're like, we got to release script, that is not something I'd want to see or talk about until after the release of the actual program. So I agree there, totally. That having been said, I think everything before The Last Jedi is fair game.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, so spoiler alert, Luke Skywalker, that's Darth Vader's boy. Princess Leia, that's his girlfriend.
Darth Vader's?
Yeah, I thought you were going to correct that. That's not Luke's girl, we hope. That's not his girlfriend. So these are the types of things we want to talk about. So that's kind of a nice little introduction to what we're going to be discussing. Hopefully we'll get some feedback. People can tell us what they want to talk about. So some of the ideas that we want to discuss in the future include looking outside just the movies. I think it'd be nice if we did a movie-by-movie breakdown and maybe gave our thoughts on like the best and worst aspects of the movies. But then we want to go outside those too. And each one of these can be an independent podcast. So we can look at the cartoon series, whether it's Clone Wars or Rebels or what's the new one? Resistance.
There's Resistance.
I haven't watched.
There are a couple of Lego
I watched
ones.
like 2 episodes of Resistance.
Yeah, we
so
got to
that's
get caught
bad.
up on some of it.
There's the books, the canon versus, is it called Legend or Lore?
Legends.
Versus Legends.
Yeah.
There's comic books, there's video games. There's a lot to cover in the Star Wars universe. So one of the things I would like to spend some time talking about is like how Rebels works its way into the universe, because it added a lot of new elements to the Star Wars world, just how it works. What are some other things we want to talk about?
Any of our favorites? Our favorite, I've already given away my favorite movie, but we'll talk about why. Favorite
Empire Strikes Back.
movies? Yeah,
was
absolutely.
me.
Star Wars, New Hope. Favorite movies, favorite series outside of the movies, characters, toys.
Toys I'm excited about because I grew up with them. I even had the Death Star playset that had the little elevator in it and the little trash compactor you could screw down with the little Dianoga, I think they're called, inside there.
And speaking
so
of growing
I'm
up,
excited.
I just got my new favorite one, so
What's that?
we'll save that
Spoiler.
for next time.
And also we can talk about like the different vehicles, and I'd like to kind of talk about Star Wars, the sci-fi versus the fantasy aspect. The majority of it's fantasy, but there is some sci-fi aspects that are pretty cool. The vehicles kind of show this. So some of it doesn't seem to work. There's the controversial bombers in The Last Jedi. Outer space bombers doesn't maybe make sense on the surface, but some of it's really cool. Either way, I'd like to spend some time talking about the vehicles, both from the toys point of view and from the in-universe point of view. So, there you go. I'm Jim.
And I'm Tim.
And this is Our Certain Point of View. Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.